With Robert DiGIOVANNI, who was recently inducted into the Michigan High School Lacrosse Coaches Hall of Fame for 2020. And Bob, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. We've had our conversations with history over the last, I guess, year and a half. This will be now the 30th conversation we've had. So first of all, congratulations and welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I guess the easiest part, and it's the same question I talk about all the time, is start from the beginning.
Well,
for you, it's Lower Merion outside of Philadelphia. Am I correct?
Well, actually, it starts a year earlier than that. In middle school, which went through ninth grade at the time, every quarter in gym class, we were introduced to maybe 4 or 5 different sports, and many of them we had never seen before. That was my first look at lacrosse, and I fell in love with it even in the gym class. So then the next year at Lower Merion, when I went to Lower Merion High School, and then they had a lacrosse team, and I went out and started there.
Now, I could put this in perspective. You are 78 years young, and
yes.
that puts high school back at 1960 to 1963. Is that correct?
I graduated from high school in '59, so my first exposure to lacrosse was '56 in 8th grade.
Okay,
in 9th grade.
Early 60s, then you moved on to Cornell, where you played as a goaltender.
Yes, yes.
I guess my question is, was lacrosse a big deal in Philadelphia in those days, and was it that big of a deal on the East Coast?
It was a big deal on the East Coast, but the hotbed at that time was Maryland. In fact, the Navy almost always won the unofficial national championship at the time. And when we were at Cornell, the big deal on our spring trip was to go to Backrack Raisin in Baltimore and go up to the attic and choose our own sticks. So it was a big deal on the East Coast, but especially in Maryland, not so big in the Philadelphia area then as it is now.
We always talk about wearing buckets as kids. And my question to you, going all the way back, because you precede me by almost 15 years, the buckets that you wore, were they similar to the buckets we wore in the 70s? Or because we had quite a bit of a helmet change from the 1970s into the 1980s?
The biggest equipment change I saw was in the early 70s.
Okay.
With especially with sticks, going away from the leather and catgut stringing to what they are now, the mesh and so forth. Yeah.
Now, how does a young man from Lower Merion end up in Cornell? And what did you study at Cornell?
Well, I applied to several different universities, and Cornell was the one I liked the most. And I got a bachelor's in English literature, language and literature.
Okay. What was the idea? Be a teacher? What was your lifelong profession? I'm curious.
I was a college professor.
Okay.
So the dream was to go on and get a graduate degree and then go on and teach in college.
Where did you teach along the way? I mean, obviously you taught at Michigan, am I correct?
I wound up teaching in Michigan, and along the way I taught at several different places to either earn some money or to gain residency in the state while I was working on my doctorate.
I'm just curious, why English literature of all things?
That's what I liked.
Okay. What excited you?
In fact, I tell players when I'm asked to speak to players, don't worry about majoring in what you think will get you a job. If you are worrying about getting just a job, go to a training school. The university is for an education, and you should major in what you like, and you'll never regret being educated, and the education hopefully will lead to something. It always will lead to something. So see the difference between education and job training. So I liked English.
What was your spark at an early age to get involved in English literature? Was it mom? Was it dad?
Well, no. When I was in elementary school, I went to an interesting school. We had to do book reports beginning with third grade. And in third grade, you did 3 per term, and in fourth grade, you did 4 per term, and in fifth grade, you did 5 per term, and sixth grade, 6 per term. So I really came to enjoy reading.
Cornell
Anyway.
and Cornell and Ivy League school, great opportunity. So you go through Cornell. You were a goaltender at Cornell, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Most valuable player in 1963.
In my senior year, correct. Yes.
Was Cornell any good?
We were just getting to be good. This was before Ned Harkness came, and certainly before the great teams of the early 70s. The first national championship, Richie Moran won in 1971. So I graduated in 63. We were just starting to build a team. And my senior year, we lost a total of 3 Ivy League games by a total of 4 goals. A few more goals, we could have won the Ivy League championship, and that would have been a real rarity at those times because Princeton had won it for many years in a row. And as I said earlier, Navy was winning the national championships, the unofficial championships.
We have a connection in Ned Harkness. Not only was the Detroit Red Wings coach here, but
Yes.
Ned was also head of the Olympic Committee in the Empire State Games in New York.
Yes.
And he lived in Lake Placid, and I lived in Lake Placid for a while. And his office was right down the street from where we had our newspaper. Long time ago.
Before going to Cornell, he was the ice hockey coach at RPI.
Yeah.
That's how he gained his reputation as a hockey coach.
He, in his later years, became, like I said, head of the New York State Empire Games, and then also involved with the Olympic Committee for the '80 Olympics. So he was an interesting guy and very successful in upstate New York, to say the least.
And the real connection with New York State, if I might throw it in here, since it fits, the Michigan Lacrosse Club was founded in the fall of '64. The 4 original founders, 3 of us were from New York State. One had played at RPI, one at Syracuse. I played at Cornell, and the 4th one went to Bainbridge Prep, which was the Naval Academy training school at the time. At that time, it was in Maryland. It no longer is in Maryland, but it was then. So 4 of us from the East Coast started the club.
I don't think that Michigan lacrosse, as we stand now, about 50 years out, would be where we are if it wasn't for both Central New York, upstate New York, and certainly Long Island. But the folks that came from those areas to Michigan,
Right.
I'm
Yes.
not sure we would be where we are at this point.
Well, I agree.
So I want to get back to the goaltending, but I'm curious, from Cornell to where, and then sort of take us from Cornell all the way through Ann Arbor.
Well, I graduated in Cornell in '63 and took a year off to earn some money to go to graduate school, and started here in the fall of '64, and that's when we started the program.
So you end up in Ann Arbor to teach.
No, I wound up in Ann Arbor to get my master's and then PhD degree, and then to teach.
Okay. How long did you teach at Michigan?
I started in Michigan in '74, and I taught in Michigan through 2001. And in 2002, I was recruited, and I accepted the offer to start a program in technical communication at a university in Japan. So I was in Japan for 7 years.
Wow. Were you involved in any of the lacrosse over there?
A bit. Waseda University, which was the second university I went to, had a fledgling team, and I worked with them a little bit. Now, as you know, since then, Japan has done pretty well in the World Games. As a matter of fact, I think they may be in the blue division this year, this coming games.
I asked the question because one of your students, if you will, JP, John Paul, is involved quite heavily with the Japanese programs. I was just wondering.
I coached John for some years. And then when I retired after the 1997 season, he took over and really took the team to I had started the team toward an all undergraduate status and varsity club status, and then he took over and really took off from there, and he won some national club championships, and he also was working with the Waseda team. Yeah.
Right. But what I was wondering was your connection in Japan any relation to his connection to Japan?
Yeah, the reason I had the connection was that he was doing it, and he said, while you're there, you might as well do a little on your own, and so I did.
Okay. Well, I guess we get back to Michigan. I guess I want to start with the easiest question of all. Why goaltender of all positions?
Well, that's an interesting question. I had always played baseball and football and even a little basketball, so all hand-eye coordination sports. And I was never the fastest guy on the field, so I that was one reason I thought goaltending was pretty attractive, was you didn't have to run a lot, and I could pass pretty well, and I could get outlet passes out, and I did pretty well. I thought I would try it, and I did pretty well.
Typically, young men who end up, or young women who end up in the goal, are usually the last kids thought of. They throw the guy in the goal. As a former goaltender, I'm a believer that it takes a special kid, a special young man, special young lady to be a goaltender. And I don't think it's a position that you just throw somebody into. I think it takes.
No, I agree. I think as in any sport, you got to be strong up the middle. And in lacrosse, the middle is goaltending, crease defense, midi, face-off midi, and crease attack. And I think it's one of the most important positions.
I think it's next to long stick midi. I think it's the most important position from not only a leadership standpoint, but you also got to find a personality that believes that, at least in my opinion, that it's never as bad as you think it is, and it's never as good as you think it is. Because when you make a save, you look great. When you don't make a save, you don't look so great. And I think that combination is something that, you know, you got to find a young person that can understand those premises.
I think so. I agree with you.
Yeah. So you kind of end up in Ann Arbor. You're teaching and you're going through the process. How did, obviously, your early childhood and your early experience with lacrosse comes back to Ann Arbor. So maybe start with, what was the first thought, the idea of how to get involved with lacrosse in Ann Arbor? Maybe we can start with that part of the conversation.
Well, it wasn't my idea initially. In the fall of '64, my first term at Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan, I was walking across the diag and saw a table that said sign up for lacrosse. And at the table was Bob Gillen. He was the one I mentioned earlier. Actually, I mentioned his school. He had gone to Bainbridge Prep, but he didn't want to go to the Naval Academy, so he came to Michigan. And he was the one who actually started the team, and I was one of the ones who signed up, and I was one of the 4 original founders and one of the 4 original officers. So it all started with a sign-up table on the diag.
Who did you play a lot in those days? Were there other club teams? Were there other men's divisional teams?
We played, our first game was against Michigan State University, which had formed its club the year before us. They formed their club in their first season was 64, ours was 65. We played mainly city clubs, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Chicago. We also played Division 2 and 3 varsities from Ohio. Ohio was always a hotbed of lacrosse. Oberlin, Kenyon, Worcester, Wittenberg, Denison, Ohio Wesleyan. We even played Ohio State a couple of times, actually, when I was coaching. We even, we had one undefeated season in which we beat them, actually, as a varsity. So we played some varsity teams. We played some varsity, some clubs, some other club teams from, say, Notre Dame and some other Big Ten schools. We went to tournaments in Pittsburgh, and we wound up playing University of West Virginia. So we went on a spring trip every year. We went to Florida or Arizona or Louisiana and wound up playing a lot of teams there, and then teams on the way back. So we really played a lot of different schools.
In those days, we now have strong Division I, Division II, and Division III teams. But in those days, Division III teams sometimes were as good as some of Division I teams.
Yeah, and I think Ohio Wesleyan is a good case in point.
How did the Ohio Division III teams end up being so strong in a time when Ohio is not exactly? I mean, what was the migration from east into Ohio, and how come we didn't get it here?
I don't know. I really don't know, except that Ohio State had been a varsity for many years, and those schools, Oberlin, Kenyon, Denison, Ohio Wesleyan, have been playing lacrosse for so many years. I think after you play for so many years, there's a tradition of having the game at your school, and I think it really helps keep the team strong. Ohio was always a hotbed. It still is, as a matter of fact. So. Yeah,
I've always said that Ohio is 10 years behind us, or ahead of us.
To
some extent. And the other thing we keep talking about, not so much lately, but the last 4 or 5 years, we always talk about Michigan being a sort of a young, lacrosse being a young sport in Michigan, and we're 50 years old. I'm not sure how young we are.
Actually, the club, if you do the math, 65, was our first season, and the first varsity season was 2012. It was 47 years.
Yeah.
It took 47 years to become a varsity. For many reasons, the most important one is that at that time, Michigan was very much like some of the big, what now are the Big 12 schools. That there are two sports, football and spring football, and
Right.
all other sports really, even all the other varsity sports, took a backseat to football, and of course the club teams took a very backseat to everything. So
Most sports are regional. I live in California. When I went to my first high school volleyball game and saw 3,000 people in the stands, and then turn around and see a basketball game a couple of days later and there's 50 people in the stands.
right, yeah, you're right, exactly right.
Changes the aspect. Did you play for the Michigan club team while you were a student and a teacher, or did you just?
Okay, get the chronology straight. At the beginning, when we first founded the school, the team, I was a student. I was working on my master's and PhD. I started out as a player coach, as a player and a player coach, and we kind of coached by committee.
Okay.
But then after I got my PhD, I went to coaching full time and didn't play anymore. Yeah.
Right. So no different than the club teams are
too old
now.
to play golf.
Right. Well, there's some legendary stories about some of the early club teams. Guys were, and they're still in their 30s, still playing, because there was not a lot of rules for those things.
Well, not just in their 30s. There were some people. I knew a goalie from the Philadelphia Lacrosse Club who was in his 40s and still playing, and a lot of Midwest teams. The Madison Lacrosse Club, for example, always imported a lot of players. They had friends from the East. They imported a lot of players to come in and play games for them. Just like actually the modern lacrosse, some of the modern lacrosse teams, MLL, they fly in, and the box league too. They fly in on a Thursday night and they play on Friday, Saturday, and or actually they practice one day and then play Saturday and Sunday. So.
I don't think the term ringer is new to any sport, but one of the conversations, even when I used to talk to Bob Lutz, Bob would play, would play Michigan State, high school team playing college and men's teams. And I can't imagine the MHSLCA looking up and saying, that's okay in today's world, because obviously it wouldn't fly from a liability standpoint.
Yeah, well, actually, to go back in time, because it fits, when I played at Lower Merion High School outside of Philadelphia, there were very few high school teams. We mainly played college freshmen. We played, matter of fact, my junior year, our only loss was to the Army freshmen, the Army plebes up at West Point. We lost 7-4. And my senior year, our only two losses were to the Penn, University of Pennsylvania freshmen. We lost, I forget the exact scores, but we lost 2 games. And our senior year, we beat Penn State freshmen 7-6. So we actually, more of our games were against college freshmen than against high school teams.
The highlights of coaching the college team at Michigan. Do you have any stories?
Well, I'm proud to say that we never had a losing season. I think we wound up winning 11 championships, 7 Big Ten, and 4 Midwest Lacrosse Association championships. The record I'm very proud of. I think it was 213, and well, I don't know. Something it's on the record, but it was very happy about that, and I was most happy about being able to take the team toward varsity status. We were a varsity club my last couple of years. A varsity club meant you were a varsity in every sense of the term, except you never got funding. Varsity clubs were started at UCLA, I believe, so they did the country a good favor. So I took them to that status, and then after I retired, John Paul took over, and then he took them even higher, and then they became varsity in 2012.
What was the hardest part in those days?
The hardest part was at the beginning.
Right. Well, what the funding? Was that the hardest part?
This is a stick. This is a ball. The hardest part was trying to teach people who had never even seen a lacrosse game, much less. I mean, they've even seen a ball or a stick, much less a game.
Right.
There's an old story about Vince Lombardi having a terrible practice. He thought it was a terrible practice, and he called the team in. He ended practice and called them into the office. And he said, "We have to get back to fundamentals." he said, "This is a ball." And I think Boyd Dowler, one of the other players, said, "Slow down, coach, you're going too fast." And of course that broke everybody up. And that's one of the classic stories about Lombardi. But that's what happened here. We had maybe the 4 founders played, and maybe we had a couple of other people who were doing graduate work, came up from some of the Ohio schools like Kenyon. I would say of a squad of 25, you had maybe 7 or 8 who played, and then you were trying to teach the game to the other 17 or 18.
We talk about the sport sort of getting in your blood and becoming a lifestyle rather than maybe a sport. Was the fanaticism the same then as it might be 20 years, 30, 40 years later?
You mean from the player's point of view?
Yeah.
From the player's point of view. I think I'm really believe this. You look at even CLL games, PLL games, they don't have a lot of fans in the stand, and we certainly didn't have a lot of fans in the stand. But I think people who play sports at whatever level, if they take it seriously, it means everything to them. And I think they try just as hard with 10 people in the stands as they would with 100,000 people in the stands. I really think they're dedicated, at least the players that I knew. A lot of them were dedicated. The fact that we were a club wasn't the issue. The issue was, can you play better?
Now, 1990 comes around, and I think you got your hand involved in starting a program at Pioneer High School.
Right. I started the program at Pioneer. My son was a senior, and he had been playing lacrosse informally for years with me and going to the Michigan games. So I started in 1990 as a club, and our first year we were runner-up in the Class B championship game, and then in 92 we won the Class B state championship. So I was really happy that in 3 years we were able to do that. The problem was when you win Class B, you get advanced or promoted to Class A. So we wound up playing schools like Detroit Country Day, Cranbrook, Brother Rice, Catholic Central, De La Salle, that had been playing for years, and we really couldn't compete very well until we started to build up the team a little bit later.
Now, Pioneer was one of those, that next 25 teams that sort of started after the original 10 had gotten off the ground.
I think we were, I'm not sure the number, but I think I remember we were like 13.
Okay.
The 13th team to be started, Michigan boys high school lacrosse. And if I'm not mistaken now, there are well over 100 boys lacrosse teams in the state.
There are 139.
Okay.
And in those days being 13, but that next wave that came, there was about 25 teams that sort of came between 1987 or 8 and probably 1995 before it sort of really exploded, before they got to Division IV and what was then the MHSLCA. My question was, when you started Pioneer that first or second year, how far behind were you from those Cranbrook teams, Rice teams? Was it a disparaging level, or was it closer than maybe you would have thought of?
Well, we didn't know how far behind we were because we didn't play them the first 3 years.
Okay.
We played them only after we won the Class B state championship. And, we were lucky to stay in a lot of those games. They were just a lot better.
Yeah.
They had a lot more real athlete. I hate to say this because every sport that takes athleticism, they're athletes, but they had more cross-training sports like football and ice hockey and basketball players than we did. And we had a lot of soccer players, and soccer is not hand-eye coordination, it's foot-eye coordination. So
when you're coaching high school, you're coaching college first. Most guys do go the other direction. They start with high school and then they end up with college athletes.
Yeah, I coached college first. I started coaching college full-time in 74. And I started the team in 90, so the Pioneer team in 90. So I'd coached for 16 years in college, yes.
You think it
before I started the high school team? You
think it helped the learning process for you as a coach, going in the other direction?
I'm sorry, which process?
You think it helped the learning process of being a better high school coach, having had the college experience?
Oh, of course, I think so. And another way it helped was that I recruited some of my college players to be assistant coaches for the Pioneer team.
Yeah.
So they were bringing, their own background and experience to the high school level.
Now, the Pioneer program got to be known through you and through Millman, through Darren, and through other coaches, Bob Stevenson, to be developers of long poles. You guys had some of the best defensemen that ever came out of lacrosse through the 90s. Was that a something that started with you, or was the way the
No, I didn't. Matter of fact, I'm not even sure we used the long stick committee very much. And of course, the close D. No, I tried to develop all the positions equally as much as I could. And again, strength up the middle. I tried to develop goalies and face-off middies and crease attackmen and then fill in the rest. So we did pretty well until we won the Class B championship.
having played against a lot of Pioneer teams in those days, it always seemed like you had the best defenseman in the state. No matter who, whether it was Bob or whether it was Darren, they just always developed. And I had a number of them played for me at Eastern, and they were always well-schooled, well-grounded. They were just good players. They were always good players.
Well, Bob Stevenson, of course, played at Michigan State, and he was a midi there, I think. But yeah, some of the coaches after me, of course, many of the coaches after me brought the program along, and in fact, they played for the state championship about, I think, 4 or 5 years ago and lost to Brother Rice in the championship, and that's kind of the pinnacle of Pioneer lacrosse to this day, I think.
Your sons played for you, obviously.
All three. I have 3 sons. They all played for me. One played for me in high school, my youngest, and all 3 played for me at Michigan.
Talk about that experience.
I'm sorry?
Talk about that experience.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
That's a great experience. I always believed in spending quality time with the kids. And my 2 oldest especially, and then even the youngest, used to come with me to games, home games, away trips, spring trips. It was a great experience. Lacrosse, they were kind of locker room rats, rug rats. And so it was great. My oldest son was goalie for years, and my middle son played midfield, and my youngest son played attack. And I'm happy to say that the oldest one is still playing box lacrosse out in California. He's a goalie, still a goalie, and he's been coaching various teams. My youngest son is coaching his. He's got an 8-year-old son. He's coaching his team, and my middle son is not doing anything in lacrosse. But 2 of the 3 have continued to give back to the game, so I'm very happy about all that. So.
A lot of us all coached our own sons, and there's always those little rules and stories about how you try to keep balance, and any of those kind of stories with you?
Well, the main story I had was that I always felt that my sons had to prove themselves to be better than people vying for the same position for me to start them, because if you started them and they weren't better, you'd be accused of giving preferential treatment. So I always worked to make sure that they were better than not all of them, but you had to be one of the 3 best attackmen. And of course, you had to be the best goalie. You had to be one of the best 6 middies to play, and they always were.
The relationships you build as a coach are tremendous. You still have great relationships with a lot of guys that played for you. And I guess
I do.
The question, you can't come out of Ann Arbor over the last 25 or 30 years and not have had everybody's crossed your path, and I've yet to hear anybody say anything but the greatest of things.
Wow, that's very nice to hear.
And that's a tribute to you, certainly.
Thank you.
I think you were one of those.
I'm most proud of the fact that a lot of my players, both in Michigan and Pioneer, have gone on to become referees, coaches, and continue to play. I have one player who played for me, who went on to play at Chicago Lacrosse Club, and he scored 1,000 goals in his lifetime. I kept up with him enough to know when he called me when he scored his 1,000th goal, and he's just recently been coaching a team in University Park, Penn State, State College, Pennsylvania. So a lot of the former players have gone on to become coaches, referees, and continue to play. So that's what I'm really happy about. I tried to plant the seed of lacrosse here, and now it's growing, and there are others out there planting seeds elsewhere, which is, I think, the best benefit.
Now, in your household, you have a lovely woman who lives with you, and
yes.
Had to be the iron stick behind all of those boys and yourself as far as organization. Your wife's name is
Judy.
Judy?
Judy, yeah.
Judy.
And not just the organization, but she was the Michigan club statistician for years. She was on the sidelines keeping the books and running the clocks. In those days, one person did both those things.
Right, but I guess what I'm asking, talk about how important she's meant to you, the family, and certainly your children.
Well,
you couldn't do what you've done without her.
I say this without sounding saccharine, but I would not have stayed with lacrosse without her. The fact that not only did she back me, there's backing by saying, yeah, go ahead and do it. I'll be here when you get home. And there's backing by saying, I'm going to come with you and be part of the team. So it meant even more that way. So I would not have stayed with lacrosse as long as I did if she had not been there. Yeah. One
of the threads in all of these interviews is that in every town there is a Mr. Giovanni. There's somebody in every community that went around and picked up equipment or found kids or did whatever he needed to do to get those programs off the ground. But a lot of times the value of our partners gets lost because they're just not in the forefront. And I think sometimes we need to make sure that those ladies are mentioned and how important they are. I know I'm very glad you asked that question, and she'll be very happy to see this interview later. I think she'll be really thrilled that you even thought of asking about her. The one question I want to ask you is there ever a point when you become the obsessive coach? She has to sit you down sometime during the season and say, whoa, slow down? Or was that something? No. I never, I'm not sure how you define obsessive, but one way to define it is that you're thinking about it 12 months a year. And I didn't. I thought about it just in season. When the first day we had winter practice into the last game, and I was able to put it away, although we did have summer teams too, in which I played or coached or whatever. But no, I believe firmly that you should not be obsessed with one sport. I think that's one of the big problems in sports today, that kids from an early age get specialized. They're playing lacrosse or soccer or basketball 12 months a year. I think they get burned out. I think they lose the benefit of cross-training sports. Like I said, for lacrosse, football, ice hockey, basketball are great. And in fact, from what I know, some coaches, even D1 coaches, are not recruiting players who are just specialized. They're looking for players who have played multiple sports. I think that's a good idea. Yeah. Well, the model that we have at the moment is, I think, slightly broken with the way kids are trained and the way we look at processes. I kind of wonder if there was with this pandemic, we've got this sort of break in the time when kids got to go play catch in the backyard instead of having, an adult. We've eliminated, even in our high school programs, we've eliminated parents from coming to practice. Instead of sitting around, what is a parent sitting around watching practice for? It doesn't make sense to me. So I think things are changing. Yeah, that's an interesting, you've raised two interesting points. I think even during this pandemic, I know a coach who sent emails to his players with a little log sheet that they can fill in and asking them to do at least 30 minutes a day on at least one of the 5 listed exercises. One is running, one is going out to the wall, throwing ball against the wall. So I think that he's still trying to continue. And as far as the parents' issue is concerned, I just heard of a situation in which some parents are going so far as to actually want to have a say in the starting team of the school. So I think that's really gone too far. I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the state of the game as we speak today. And so maybe start with where do you think we are right now with what you've noticed? Well, in general, as you well know, lacrosse is the fastest growing sport in the United States. Not sure of the reasons, probably a lot of them, but one place that's not growing is D1. You look at every level of lacrosse, Pony League, elementary school, middle school, senior high school, D2, D3, D1 you can name, I think there are only 10 teams west of the Appalachians, D1 lacrosse teams west of the Appalachians, starting with,
Cleveland, I'm not counting Ohio State. We're saying I am counting Ohio State, not Penn State. Starting with Ohio State and Bellarmine in Louisville, you got Cleveland State, Detroit Mercy, Michigan. You got Marquette, you got Notre Dame, you've got Denver, you've got Air Force, you got Utah. I may have left one or two out, but I think there are only 10 D1 teams west of the Appalachians. The big bottleneck in the growth of lacrosse is D1. And what's killed men's lacrosse at the D1 level is Title IX. I think this year there were 75 men's lacrosse teams D1, and there were 115 women's lacrosse teams D1. And what's killed men's lacrosse, or the promotion or development of men's lacrosse at the D1 level, is Title IX. Unfortunately, very difficult to start a varsity men's team at a school that has a varsity women's team, because then the school would have to form another women's team to keep the numbers equal. So I think that's the state of the game in terms of growth. Is there's a bottleneck at D1.
Right now, from a number standpoint, we stopped growing in 2015 exponentially to the amount of growth that was the prior 15 years. We've actually slowed down. And
I'm not surprised.
And that's partly because just population has changed. There's just not as many kids as there were. And every year it becomes, you've got the Grosse Points looking at closing a high school. You've got various, school districts around the state that are trying to consolidate some of the schools that they have. We just don't have as many kids as we had in those days. And so the numbers plateaued, and the Federation and U.S. Lacrosse would tell you that. So we're kind of on this sort of plateau at the moment in terms of numbers, but I think part of it becomes there's more teams. Everybody's got a shingle out that wants to run a junior team. Everybody wants to make money at the sport, but there's only X amount of kids that play.
Yeah,
and it changes things.
Yeah, the other issue in terms of growth and in terms of quality growth is, I think, at least, even though it's flattened out, the number of players, the number of kids who want to play lacrosse far exceeds the number of qualified coaches. I think one of the biggest problems in states like Michigan is that a lot of the teams are coached by parents. They're well-meaning, and they've seen a lot of YouTube, and they've read some books, but they've not played. And I think that's the main difference to developing talent in a place like Michigan and a place like Maryland. In Maryland, you've got people coaching who are all Americans in college, or and were playing for the time they were 10 years old. Whereas in Michigan, a lot of teams are being coached. I'm not denigrating them. It's a great service that they're providing, because you wouldn't have a team without them. But I think that's one reason the quality has not been developed, because the coaches themselves don't have enough experience. And I think it's true with referees also. I think there are not a lot of really qualified referees in places like Michigan, and certainly not in other non-hotbed states. I think that's one of the other things slowing the growth down. Quality growth.
Yeah. Several years ago, we moved to having our high school kids coach our middle school program and pay them a good rate, with the idea that they were more understanding of the sport. They knew how to play. And then I get a little sympathy from a coaching perspective, because now I'm teaching these kids how to coach at that level. And every team had an adult parent who would oversee the order, if you will. But with having the kids coach them, then we didn't have parents involved. So it took the emotion out. It took any of the priority out as to who can start and who can't. And we had pretty good success with some of those kinds of things. Unfortunately, there's just not many. We suffer from, I think, a depth of quality in terms of coaching in the state. I do.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. By the way, an additional comment about the older kids coaching the younger. One way to learn something is to try to teach it. And I think that's a very good idea. Yeah, we do. I think you look at what happens when teams from Michigan who are very good, who win state championships, go out east and play like Haverford School, or even they play Culver Academy from Indiana, and the results are not encouraging. They usually lose pretty badly. And Culver, in fact, loses pretty badly to places like Hill School sometimes. So clearly there are some hotbeds. Hill Academy in Ontario, Culver in Indiana, and IMG in Florida are the three premier high school hotbed lacrosse teams. And then I think the bulk of the second tier are from the East. New York State has caught up I caught up to Maryland a long time ago, and now I think Pennsylvania is giving both those states a run also. So, but still, the talent is still overloaded in the East.
One of the coaches I have at Skyline is Zach Schwartz, who was a Skyline player who went to IMG, who eventually played at Michigan. And Zach would tell you that even the IMG stuff, a lot of it's not cash grab. It's obviously promotion opportunity. Money means
Right.
opportunity, but a lot of it becomes sort of promises that don't ever come to full life because there's no road there. And I've coached Michigan State's girls team for a long time. I'm now coaching men's Oakland's team, and it surprises me kids coming out of good programs that don't know what a drop step is. They don't know what some of the basic footwork is. They can shoot 100 miles an hour, but they have no idea where the ball's going. It's crazy.
Well, wow. I'd like to talk about some of this a bit later when we have kind of the open-ended things and let you ask your questions first. Yeah, I think part of the problem is that they've been coached maybe at the lower level by people who were not very experienced in lacrosse themselves and didn't really drill the fundamentals and didn't stop them from doing things that they're trying to do. So, yeah, I think the coaching really needs to be beefed up in a place like Michigan.
I think of kids who try to take half-court shots in basketball that can't do a layup. That's sort of my analogy. If you can't do a layup, you can't shoot from 50 feet. Does that make sense?
So much more. The fans might applaud when you deke a goalie and then put it cross-side low, a little bounce shot without a lot of velocity, but it's clearly a goal. But they roar when you drop and shoot sidearm at 110 miles an hour and get an upper corner. And, of course, the kids are looking for the roar, and that's the big mistake.
So if you had the magic wand and you were sitting on top of this Michigan castle, what would you tell the rest of the coaches, including me? What would you tell us that we could do better at in terms of coaching?
Well, I have a few notes here. Is it all right to go over
Absolutely.
them?
Absolutely.
All right. Please understand, I'm not trying to pontificate. I'm just telling you what I think from my years of experience. What are some of the things we can do better? I think too many coaches, especially younger players, are very eager to get to the X's and O's in practices. They spend just a little time on fundamentals. They want to get to the X's and O's. And I think they spend much less time on fundamentals than they should, and I think that's a mistake. I think fundamentals should be stressed at every level, even through the pros, every level. Conditioning is a fundamental that a lot of coaches overlook, and their kids get worn out by the fourth quarter. They get beaten because they're not in good shape. I think passing, feeding, shooting is all one action. Feeding and shooting or passing just at different targets, and they should be stressed, and ground ball should be stressed. There are the things: conditioning, feeding, passing, shooting, ground ball should be stressed much more than they are. And notes on shooting. We were talking about shooting earlier. The way to shoot is to get the goalie to move and put the ball where the goalie isn't. There was a baseball player, I've forgotten his name now, who had a very high batting average. Willie Keeler, I think his name was. And they said, "How do you do it?" He said, "I hit him where they ain't." And that's my advice to shooting. You shoot it where the goalie ain't. Get the goalie to move and put it where he ain't. And placement is more important than velocity. And for God's sakes, overhand is the most accurate shot you can get. The more you deviate from overhand, the less accurate you get. That's why you see these, even at D1, these sidearm shots from 20 yards out that don't come within 6 yards of the goal. So they would be some of the comments I'd make on fundamentals.
I completely agree 100%, but there are two things I have to take not issue with, but just to point out. One of the things that we try to talk about with our kids is that you teach them how to what is the point of release from the stick, so that they have some understanding of where the ball comes out of the stick. And the first thing you ask a young man, if he comes around the corner, you're just happy to shoot at the net 36 square feet and shoot at it, right? Yes. Well, wouldn't it be nice to be able to shoot high or low, or shoot left or right, or hit hips or feet? Well, the only way you do that is by going overhand to understand where the point of release is. And it's body mechanics. It's absolute body mechanics. So you look through that part of it and you kind of move forward with it. But what's interesting, you said it's overhand, and I completely agree 100%, except that they have the golf machines that can test the drivers, and they have the Iron Mike.
Right.
Well, they
Right.
tried that a couple years ago with a lacrosse stick, going up top, going sideways, and going down below. And it turns out there's only about 3% difference accuracy if you can handle it between high, side, and low. It is.
It's
Now
only
the difference
3%?
is the difference arguments is if it's who's holding on to it, does they have the practice? Now we're teaching kids to shoot around, using kids to stand around and shoot around, screens, those kinds of things. But the
Well,
fundamental,
sometimes you want to shoot sidearm because you're shooting around a screen, of course. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
We just don't
When
teach. We just don't teach the fundamentals of point of release.
Yeah, when I was in Japan helping the kids, in Japanese, I'd say Mimi Day. Mimi is the Japanese word for ear. Mimi Day. Everything's from the ear. Richie Moran, when he coached Cornell, if you didn't shoot, pass, feed, catch, the ear was the target and was the goal for everything. If you didn't shoot from the ear or feed from the ear or catch at the ear or pass to the ear, you were on the bench. And everything's from the ear. Now that means overhand, as you say. Sometimes you have to drop the stick to shoot around a screen. But I think that's the big problem. Kids get very excited when they can shoot 100 miles an hour and put the ball into the upper corner and maybe even break the twine. But that's not what's important. What's important is scoring a goal.
Right.
And they have to know the difference. Yeah.
And the kid that shoots under the post at 100 miles an hour, if he takes 100 shots, what's his percentage versus a kid who knows where the ball's going?
And and who gets the goalie to move first and then put where the goalie isn't. I mean, there's got to be 300-400% better results when you do that than if you just shoot.
Which goes back to the original point that multi-sport athletes have a great advantage,
right?
over those who don't. And,
I think so.
Okay. Well, is there anything? I guess the one question I wanted to ask you is there a highlight? Is there a story? Is there a moment in this career of yours that stands out over others?
Well, what I'd like to do first, because I want to maybe end with that, because you might find that a very interesting story, but
okay.
I have a couple more notes, so we have a few minutes.
Keep going. No, that's fine.
All right.
Absolutely.
We're talking about goalies, and you were a goalie and I was a goalie, and I think I watch a lot of lacrosse live and on TV. I don't think goalies today play the position most efficiently. Goalies move the stick to the ball and maybe follow up with the body. And the way I was taught and the way I taught my goalies, and I always had good success, was that you don't move the stick and then follow with the body. You move the body and the stick simultaneously to the ball. Therefore, the body's always behind the shot. When you just move the stick, the body's not necessarily behind the shot. So I think that's one key to playing lacrosse goalie efficiently. You got to move the stick, the body and the stick simultaneously to the ball. And the other thing I notice is too many goalies guess. They're looking at stick position or eyes or shoulders or hips, and I think they've got to react to shots. And too many goalies guess, and I think they need to react. That's my comments on playing goal.
Believe it or not,
I got a couple other things.
Go.
I think one of the big problems that I see in D1 lacrosse, and I'm not saying this is a problem at all levels, you watch D1 games, they're all the same. They're all the same. They all play man-to-man virtually 95% of the time. They might throw in a zone occasionally. They never have a combination of man-to-man and zone. There are several different combinations, as in basketball, boxing one, and the offenses are always the same. Keep it around, keep it going, try to beat your man, look for the slide, look for the feed. And here's what I think. I think you need to have multiple offenses for both man-to-man and zone defenses. You need to be able to play against both kinds of defenses and have multiple things you can do, whether that's inverting a midi to behind or even taking an attack man up top. I don't see anybody do that, and I think that's kind of neat because long stick defense are not used to playing up top at their straining line. Having asymmetrical formations to throw sliding packages. I think you need multiple offenses. I said multiple defenses, man-to-man, zone combos, and I think you should switch during a game as needed. If your man-to-man is not working, go to zone. If your zone's not working, combo. You need to switch offenses If your 3-2 is not working, go to something else, go to different offenses as needed. And even if not needed, switch them occasionally anyway, because they confuse. We had a system at Michigan. Every time that the other team came out with the ball, our goalie would yell out one of three things. He yelled out he yelled out the name of the beer. A beer meant we're going to play man-to-man. He yelled out the name of a wine. A wine meant we're going to play zone. And he yelled out the name of a mixed drink like rye and ginger, and that meant we're going to play a combination. It was up to him. He could call like a middle linebacker calling defenses, or he could call a different defense. And it really threw. The last time they came down, we were in a man-to-man. All of a sudden, they're getting doubled from somebody they never expected because we're in a combination. So, I recommend that they do that for game planning. And then finally, I guess this might be the most important one. I was always a fan of countermeasures. Countermeasures are moves to defeat or at least weaken the opponent's strengths. They should be, you have to practice them regularly, if not every day, because if you don't practice them, you can't in a game say, this guy's killing us, he has 5 goals, we got to play ball denial, and never have practiced ball denial. So countermeasures are these kinds of things, and I'll give you 2 examples. One I adopted and modified from basketball, the box and one, I call ball denial, and let me explain. That player Teat from Cornell a couple years ago, that's what they did. They tried to lock him out, but they didn't do it fully. Ball denial is, and here's what I would do. Let's take an attack man. You put your third best defenseman on their best attack man, and that's a win-win because your best defenseman is now on their second best attack man. Your second best defenseman is on their third best attack man. And now you rotate every 5 minutes your third, fourth, and fifth defenseman on this player, because to get rid of ball denial, he's going to be running and trying to move a lot, come off screens, but you're keeping fresh legs on him every 5 minutes. And now the best way to beat ball denial is you come off a pick, or you get the ball when it's a shot out of bounds, you bring it in from out of bounds. One I developed myself, I call the Goalie Ride. If you're playing against a goalie who's a wall and he's killing you, and you can't get anything by him, the Goalie Ride. Every time he makes a save, you lock on man-to-man on their defenseman and their middies. You make the goalie take the ball up the field. Today, with the time clock, with the 20 seconds to clear, you could get a failure to clear in 20 seconds. Goalies don't like. I played goal. And the idea, did we lose?
No, we're good. Keep going.
Okay. Anyway, finally, you make the goalie take the ball every time, so you tire him out, and then as he gets to the midfield line, you jump him, and you've got a jump package whereby somebody jumps him, and then you fall into a zone behind that to catch the outlet pass. So the Goalie Ride is something I developed to try to help defeat good goalies who were killing us because we couldn't score. Countermeasures, I'd be happy to discuss countermeasures. I've got a lot more. I just want to give 2 examples. Yeah. I'd be happy to discuss them with coaches if they want to.
I now understand John Paul's 10-man ride. I know probably where he got a lot of his ideas and thoughts, because he just basically explained what Michigan did for a long time.
Yeah. Now the story, the classic story is this. Fritz Chrysler became a football coach and athletic director in Michigan. He had been football coach at Princeton, and he knew about lacrosse and how dangerous lacrosse could be. So he didn't want the football players in Michigan playing lacrosse. In 1940, they had an intramural squad, a couple of squads, they played together. In 41, they decided to have some games. Oberlin and Kenyon were the only 2 teams in Ohio playing at that time. And so they said they invited Kenyon up to play in Ann Arbor. Kenyon beat them. he heard about that game. Chrysler heard about that game and said, I don't want you doing this anymore because you could get hurt, and I don't want you getting hurt because you can't play football. They then, behind his back, got in touch with Oberlin and went down to Oberlin and play and said, he'll never know. Unfortunately, the last minute of the game at Oberlin was a very close game, ended in a fight, and the Oberlin police were called in to try to stop the fight. And it made the papers in Oberlin and the Michigan Daily around the story, and Chrysler read the story and was incensed. He sent a couple of his men to where the kids had their locker room to confiscate all of their equipment, and he hid it. And then he called in the captains. He said, "You're done. No more lacrosse, and you can't anyway because you don't have any equipment." All right. So this was in 1941. In 1964, when we started the team, we were practicing in the intramural building, and an old man who had been a maintenance guy there for years came up and he said, "Hey, you guys, you don't have to buy lacrosse equipment. I know there's a lot of lacrosse equipment." He said, "Really? Really?" He said, "Yes, come follow me." We went down to the basement of the intramural building, and there's squash courts there. And between each set of squash courts, there's a little alley. It was the equipment that Chrysler had confiscated from that team in 41, moldering helmets and gloves and sticks. And we thanked the guy because he was so kind to think of us, but we couldn't use any of it because it had been destroyed over the years. But that's a connection. That's my favorite story, because that's the connection between the 41 fledgling team that played 2 games and then the modern lacrosse club that was started in 64, and I was one of the founders, and I was one of those connections. That's my favorite story.
Last question to you. Tell me something about you that people wouldn't know.
Something about me that people wouldn't know.
As a coach.
As a coach. I don't know if they would. I think most people would know, who play for me would know about me as a coach. I mean, some rules you never break. You never put your hands on a player. You never say anything to opposing players. You may say a lot to opposing coaches, but not to opposing players. And I think you treat. I had a real problem, I guess. One theory of coaching is you treat players differently based on their personalities. I never went for that because I thought players would automatically see the different players being treated differently, and I try to abide by the same rules and regulations. If you didn't make the requisite number of practices, you couldn't start, and if you didn't make a number bigger than that, you didn't play. And I think I did that all through my career. So I don't know anything about a coach that my players wouldn't know because I never hid anything from them.
I always think of my favorite line is, I don't treat everybody equal, but I treat them all fair.
Well, that's an interesting point. Of course, there's the classic Lombardi story too. The player said he treats us all equally. He treats us like dogs. But you know that one. So no, I don't know. I don't know anything about me as a player that the players wouldn't already know. Except I think that maybe what they didn't know is how much I guess even subconsciously at the beginning and consciously at the end, saw them really as sons, as extended family. I think I still keep in touch with a lot of my former players. I mentor them over the phone or in person, and some of my best friends are some of my former players.
Well, I wanted to thank you for the time that you have spent with us. You are a class act. I know of a lot of people that do nothing but talk terrific about your background and what you've meant to them. You've certainly meant a lot to lacrosse. You're a member of the Michigan chapter U.S. Lacrosse Hall of Fame, and now you're a member of the Michigan High School Lacrosse Coaches Hall of Fame. And Bob, I appreciate the time, the effort, and just know that you've meant a lot to a lot of folks. Thank you so much for your kind comments, and I want to thank the committee, the Michigan High School Lacrosse Coaches Association Committee, for choosing me to be so honored. And I was honored in 2009 by the U.S. Lacrosse Michigan Chapter Hall of Fame, and I thought that was be the end of any of the awards I would be getting. I was very surprised and honored to find out that
I was getting this one. So I want to thank you all for doing that, and thank you for taking the time to interview and for being such a professional at it. I enjoyed this, and I really would like to see it. I'm sure you'll let me know how I can do that, and my wife would like to see it also, I think.
Well, please hug Judy for us and tell her how much she's meant to the sport from maybe a side seat next to you. And none of us would be where we are if it wasn't for the folks that are behind us, for sure. So thanks you again.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll be in touch as soon as I get this edited.
Thank you so much. You take care. And listen, good luck the next season.
Thank you very much.